play that Donald Trump is trying to create and has been trying to create with this judge, this sort of back and forth with him, which is why Costello was such an effective Trump voice on the stand. I want to play some sound from Trump saying Merchan is crooked, it's dangerous. Let's take a listen.
We have conflicted, but he's a crooked judge, and you'll understand that. And I say that knowing that it's very dangerous for me to say that, and I don't mind, because I'm willing to do whatever I have to do to save our country and to save our Constitution. I don't mind.
So Little Hands is trying to egg.
He's telling us.
He's telling us.
He's willing to do whatever he's telling us.
He's telling us. And that's the thing. It's a duality. He's not only egging the judge to throw him in jail. I dare you to throw me in jail, right? It's also setting up the narrative, regardless, that he's egging also a broader population of supporters out there, that he's ready to do anything, his words. Now, how that's heard by people matters in this moment. Is that something the judge also is concerned about? Or is he just looking, he's calling the balls and strikes just as he did during the trial? He's going to do the same when it comes to the sentencing.
Absolutely. I mean, Bragg said during the press conference after the verdict, we pursued this case without fear or favor. And that's one of my favorite phrases to apply, because if you let yourself be cowed by somebody like Donald Trump, whether you're Alvin Bragg or Judge Juan Merchan, then this world collapses, right? Yeah. Again, there's no place for the rule of law. And so the luxury that Juan Merchan has is the following. The pre-sentence investigation report that you guys have spoken about, that's prepared by a probation officer after he sits down, he or she sits down and interviews Donald Trump. That is a sentencing recommendation that the judge is going to take very seriously, because that is what that person's role is. They explore Donald Trump's personal life, professional life, his criminality. Now, what we just saw and what happened yesterday, if I'm the prosecution, I actually don't mind if he keeps doing that, because he's digging himself into a deeper hole. He's showing a lack of remorse that the judge is going to take into an account when he's deciding what to do for a sentence. And the fact that there's this defiance of the gag order because Trump violated it again. You know, yesterday he violated it when we were having deliberations. He violated it during closing arguments. Just because you didn't see the DA's office file a motion regarding it doesn't mean it didn't happen. And so I think people need to understand, when I say that what we see there is old and tired, it literally is. What we saw yesterday with Donald Trump had Weekend at Bernie's energy.
Yeah.
I mean, he is old and decrepit, and I will stand by that. He is definitely the shadow of what he was 4 years ago, but we cannot underestimate the danger of what he says and what he does. His rhetoric is not just words. And so in the law, we try to make a really clear distinction between what you're allowed to say under the First Amendment and what you're not allowed to say, and the lines get blurred sometimes. But in this instance, though, when he says what he's doing, it's not so much him. I mean, we saw this happen and play out in the trial. He, like most mob bosses, gets other people to do his dirty work. You didn't see him actually making the payments directly to Stormy Daniels' lawyer. He used Michael Cohen. He used David Pecker. He uses people. And so here he uses his surrogates. You see that from the Weaponization Committee in the House Judiciary. Right. You see what happens during the trial, that he brings in his red tie brigade. But when he's saying what he's saying, it's going to hurt him at sentencing. So there's a part of me, the old school prosecutor, is like, go ahead, say it, because you're digging yourself a hole.
It's so interesting to remarkalize, because on one hand, you sort of have this rhetorical framework that Donald Trump and his allies are working with, as you said, to shift the prism of this upcoming election. At the same time, you've got technocrats who are actually doing the work of shifting the rules. So you think about sort of what we just saw from the Supreme Court, allowing for racial gerrymandering, right? The fact that if they can't win with the current rules, then they will, in tandem with all this rhetoric, work on changing the rules.
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple of things. The first is, those do work in tandem, because what you have is Donald Trump saying, I'll do anything, which is like outrageous out to here. And then you have, as you call them, the technocrats who say, well, we'll only go this far. You know, and so like he sets the outer bounds of outrageousness, and then they set a bound that would have been outrageous unto itself, but now seems quite within the rule, you know, the bounds of normal, given that, you know, they're not, you know, fomenting insurrection. On the Trump sentencing, I want to add one thing. I think the judge will be smart too, and I think he will. He will ignore the attacks on him. I mean, he is not going to say, because you attacked the judge, I'm going to increase your sentence. I do think that this is where the contempt citations will come back into play, and the attacks on the judicial system as a whole. The judge is there to uphold the rule of law and to see whether he is remorseful of his conduct, and he is going to take the things that Donald Trump did that violated gag orders, his attacks on the jury, his attacks on witnesses, and I think that is where Donald Trump has dug his hole. But Alicia, he wants to be the victim. He wants to be the victim. He wants to say that he has aggrieved, because the Republican Party now fuels itself on aggrievement. Like, it fuels itself. People ask me all the time, why do they sue so many cases and lose? Why do I have so many voting rights cases where they lose? And I say part of it is they want to lose so that after the election they can say the election was rigged. Right? If they won any of these cases, then they would have gotten what they wanted. They want to say that they were cheated. And I think that's where Donald Trump is right now in this sentencing. He wants to say that he was treated unfairly, because it gives a permission structure for his supporters to be even more outrageous and more lawless as we head towards 5 months from now.
Can I get a final word, and then you have to go, host your own show.
I like hanging out with you guys, though. And I believe Mark will agree with me here. It's the Todd Blanches, the Alina Habbas that are allowing him to get this done, though. This guy doesn't have a JD. He doesn't have a bar license. Right. There are people that are giving him access to the place where they can lose these BS lawsuits that they're bringing, that Mark's kicking their butts on all across the United States. That is the problem. We have an entire phalanx of lawyers that are propping up Donald Trump to allow him to go to court to do these things. And that is a shame on the profession. That is the biggest debasement. I don't care what Jim Jordan does. I don't care what, Marco Rubio does. I care about the lawyers that have an independent ethical obligation to make sure that they protect the rule of law. And the facilitation that happens with these people makes me so angry, because but for them helping him, he wouldn't have access to this. And that is why it's so important for Mark to fight the good fight like he does. And that's why it's so important for us to look at what happens in court and say, I don't care if you're going to attack it. The process worked. And that's why we had to respect what the results were. The results ended up being the right thing, which is the 34 guilty felonies.
Well, you cannot see in your line of sight, but I got to see you, Mark Elias. Your head is, the size of a refrigerator.
Case he's not going to win, honey.
Right.
I agreed with you.
Don't mess with Mark. Don't mess with Mark.
Mark is sticking with us. Katie, thank you.